It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind that feels too quiet, too still, as if the universe is holding its breath before something irreversible unfolds. I had just returned home early from a weekend trip. Something had told me to come back. Call it intuition, call it fate, but I was not supposed to walk in on what I saw. My maid was standing frozen in the middle of the living room, her face pale and full of dread. Behind her, in my home, in my sanctuary, was a scene that shattered the very definition of my reality. I couldn't move. My mind screamed, my heart thudded like war drums, but my body betrayed me with silence. There was no need for words. The truth stood stark and obscene. He didn't speak. He didn't explain. He didn't even apologize, and in that moment my world collapsed, not with noise, but with a haunting quietness that would echo for days. Infidelity isn't just the breaking of vows. It's the murder of trust. It is the most violent form of emotional theft. Robbery that leaves you staring at the pieces of a life you once called yours. In the days that followed, I wandered through the house like a ghost. Rooms no longer felt familiar. The bed was cold not because of absence, but because it was contaminated. Every item, every wall whispered lies, but there was someone who saw it all and said nothing, the maid, the one who had been standing in the heart of the storm. She didn't utter a single word, but her eyes held a sorrow that mirrored mine. I assumed she was ashamed. I assumed she was complicit, but I was wrong. One evening, after days of avoiding each other, she came to me, gently placing a tray of tea on the table. She looked up, eyes trembling, and she said quietly, "I'm sorry you had to see that. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't let you walk into that alone." It was the first time anyone acknowledged my pain. Not the betrayal, not the scandal. Me, the woman who lost more than a partner. She lost her sense of safety, her ability to believe, to trust, to feel like enough. And through those quiet exchanges, something shifted. I began to see her not as the help, but as a witness, a survivor too. She told me stories of how often women like her become invisible, how their voices are stifled under class and silence. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. We shared brokenness, and in that brokenness, we found clarity. What followed was not rage, not revenge, but reclamation. I let him go, not because I had no fight left in me, but because I refused to fight for someone who made a stranger more real than me. I began to rebuild, not my relationship, but myself, brick by brick, tear by tear. This experience, as cruel and unforgiving as it was, gave birth to a new version of me, stronger, sharper, not bitter, but bolder. I became a woman who no longer fears solitude, who no longer begs to be chosen. Because now, I choose myself, and through it all, the maid, she remained. Not as an employee, but as a reminder that sometimes the people society overlooks carry the wisdom, the loyalty, and the compassion that even your most intimate partner may lack. It was an ordinary day, or at least it should have been. The kind of day where your biggest concern is whether to take a nap or watch a movie. But that quiet Sunday shifted from mundane to something I will never unsee. I had decided, on a whim, to come home early from a weekend trip. I told no one. I wanted to surprise him. Maybe cook dinner together, maybe just lie in bed and talk. That craving for simple intimacy led me to the doorstep of devastation. As I unlocked the front door and stepped into the house, the air felt off, still, too still, like the air right before a thunderstorm. That silence that presses on your skin before the sky decides to break open. I thought maybe they were asleep or out. Then I heard it, a sound I knew all too well, a laugh I had once loved. Only this time it wasn't meant for me. I turned the corner into the living room and stopped in my tracks. There she was, my maid, standing stiff, her eyes wide like a child caught doing something terribly wrong. But what shocked me wasn't her presence. It was the guilt bleeding out of her face, the dread she couldn't contain. She wasn't the one laughing. That came from deeper in the house. She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost and wanted to become one. In her silence was 1,000 warnings, but none of them reached me in time. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I walked forward, numb, as if some invisible force was pushing me to witness what no one should have to see. As I stepped into the bedroom doorway, the room that held our whispered dreams and promises, the sight on that bed punched every ounce of breath from my lungs. There he was, half-dressed, with someone who wasn't me. Someone who wasn't even a stranger. Someone who had visited our home more than once. And yet, in that moment, I was the stranger, the outsider in my own life. They froze when they saw me. He didn't jump up. He didn't cover himself. He just stared at me, mouth open, like an actor who'd forgotten his next line. The woman scrambled, embarrassed, but he looked caught only because he'd been caught, not because he was sorry. Not because he was ashamed. That hurt more than the betrayal itself. His stillness, that cold, unfeeling stare, as if I was the interruption, as if I was the problem, and I couldn't speak. My throat closed in. My heart was a wild animal trying to escape my chest. I turned and walked back into the living room. My maid was still there, rooted in place, her hands trembling slightly, her lips parted, maybe to say something, maybe to apologize, but nothing came, nothing needed to. Her eyes were swollen with unshed tears. She had known. She had heard it, seen it, and held it in. Not out of malice, but out of fear, out of confusion, out of not knowing how to protect me from something so grotesquely intimate. Time moved like honey in the hours after that. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at the wall. Minutes, hours. I could still hear faint sounds, footsteps, drawers, maybe the door closing, but it didn't matter. My ears were ringing too loudly with the sound of my own disbelief. I kept replaying it, every detail, every frame, like a film I couldn't turn off. And underneath it all was a scream, silent but sharp enough to slice through bone. I wanted to cry but couldn't. I wanted to rage but felt paralyzed. That kind of pain doesn't explode. It sinks, quietly and completely, like being dragged into the deepest part of the ocean. Shock is a strange kind of armor. It holds you up while your heart bleeds beneath it. You walk, you breathe, you nod to people who speak to you, but inside there is chaos. That was me, sitting on that couch, while the scent of betrayal still lingered in the walls. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It was the sudden erasure of everything I believed to be true. The person I trusted most had turned into a stranger before my eyes. And that transformation, that moment when love curdled into something cruel, changed me forever. It's strange how a moment can divide your life. Before and after, that was mine. That single, heart-shattering moment when I opened a door not just into a room, but into a truth I wasn't ready for. The moment when I saw that everything I had been protecting, nurturing, and sacrificing for had already been discarded behind my back. It was the moment my heart broke in real time, and the silence that followed. It wasn't peace. It was the sound of everything I knew falling apart. The hours and days that followed were not filled with loud arguments or confrontations. There were no thrown objects, no screaming matches, no apologies scribbled on torn paper. What followed instead was a devastating unraveling, a slow peeling back of every thread that once held my world together. Trust, that fragile and sacred thing, didn't break all at once. It dissolved slowly, like paper submerged in water. Every memory I replayed became suspect. Every "I love you" he had ever whispered suddenly sounded rehearsed, like lines from a script meant to distract me from the truth that had long been growing behind my back. I remember sitting in the bedroom alone, staring at our framed pictures. Holidays, birthdays, anniversaries. Smiling faces that now felt like lies. I kept wondering, was he already sleeping with her then? Was he texting her when he told me he was just working late? The questions became a poison I couldn't stop drinking. My mind became a battleground, torn between disbelief and the need to make sense of what had happened. But there's no logic in betrayal. Infidelity doesn't come with answers. It comes with shadows that twist your sense of reality until you no longer know what's real. He didn't fight for me. That was the part I kept circling back to. No grand confession, no desperate plea, just silence. And silence, when you're breaking, is a scream that no one answers. In that silence, I began to see the rot underneath our life together. The nights he seemed emotionally distant. The way his phone was always face down. The sudden irritability when I asked simple questions. I used to dismiss those things. I thought love meant trusting even when your gut whispered otherwise. I thought loyalty meant giving benefit of the doubt, even when doubt had claws. The betrayal didn't just happen in the bedroom. It happened in the lies he let pile up like dust. It happened in the indifference he showed once I knew. It happened in how easy it was for him to let me carry the weight of the fallout alone. I realized then that infidelity isn't just about sex, it's about abandonment. It's the act of emotionally vacating a relationship while still playing house. It's pretending to be a partner while your heart belongs elsewhere. I began to notice how even the smallest things now hurt. His scent on a shirt he left behind, a dish we used to cook together, the feel of my bed that now felt foreign. I no longer felt at home in the space we had built. I was a stranger in my own life, picking up emotional rubble in a place that used to bring me comfort. I felt foolish, I felt humiliated, and more than anything, I felt replaced, not just physically, but emotionally. Like everything I had to give was no longer enough. That was the sharpest cut of all, not the cheating itself, but the realization that he had willingly chosen someone else's attention over my loyalty. What tore me apart wasn't that he had betrayed me with another woman. It was that he had done so without remorse, as if I were disposable, as if everything we had built was a phase he'd outgrown. I kept asking myself what I lacked. What made me so easy to betray? That's what infidelity does. It turns the victim into the one carrying shame. You start blaming yourself for someone else's inability to be honest. You start examining your own body, your voice, your habits, wondering where you fell short, when in truth, the fault was never yours to carry. This unraveling left me raw. I couldn't look at couples the same way. I couldn't hear the word love without wincing. Every part of me felt violated, not just by what he did, but by how easily he walked away from the damage. That kind of betrayal forces a reckoning. It makes you question your identity. You wonder, was I blind, or was he just that good at pretending? And yet, even in that unraveling, there was something strange taking shape. A painful clarity. I saw things I had ignored. I recognized patterns I had excused. The unraveling, though cruel, became a mirror. I saw not only his betrayal, but all the ways I had abandoned myself in the name of love. All the ways I had lowered my voice, made myself smaller, tolerated coldness because I believed loyalty meant endurance. His infidelity broke the illusion, but in doing so, it forced a truth I couldn't unsee, that I had been loving someone who didn't know how to love me back, and that realization, though devastating, was the beginning of a deeper awakening. One where I could finally see that trust is not just about fidelity. It's about presence, about honesty, about showing up for someone, even when it's hard. He didn't just fail me by cheating. He failed me by vanishing emotionally long before he ever touched another woman. In the days following the betrayal, my house became a haunted space. Every room echoed with silence that once held laughter. I couldn't bring myself to sit in the same chair at the dining table. I avoided the left side of the bed. Everything felt contaminated. The air itself seemed denser, harder to breathe. In all this emotional debris, she was there, my maid, the woman who had been silently moving in the background of my life for years. She was there when I cried without sound. She was there when I sat for hours without speaking, staring into the void of disbelief. At first, I couldn't look at her without feeling a strange mixture of shame and suspicion. She had witnessed what I wasn't meant to see, she had seen it before I did, and in my pain I projected blame onto everything and everyone close enough to reach, but she never recoiled, she never defended herself. She didn't offer explanations or dramatics. She moved with a quiet grace, cleaning around me gently, leaving tea beside me without a word, as if to say, I see you, and I won't push you to speak until you're ready. Her silence wasn't distance, it was respect. I began to realize she had been caught in the middle of something impossible. She was bound by class, by fear of losing her job, by the agony of knowing and being unable to protect me from it. One afternoon, while I sat curled on the couch clutching a blanket I hadn't washed in weeks, she approached hesitantly. Her voice was soft, almost breaking. I wanted to tell you, she said. But I didn't know how. I didn't know if you would believe me. I've seen too many women turn against the wrong person when their heart is breaking. Her voice cracked then, and for the first time I saw her, not just as my maid, not just as a bystander, but as a woman. A woman who had witnessed betrayal unfold like a slow, cruel play, all while pretending not to notice, not to feel. Her vulnerability cracked something inside me. For weeks I had felt completely alone, isolated in a pain no one seemed able to reach. But in that moment she reached it, not with grand gestures but with truth. A truth layered in fear, compassion, and unbearable stillness. She had been watching him lie, watching him dismiss me, watching him slip into cruelty masked as indifference. And she had carried that truth like a secret too dangerous to speak. What unfolded in the days after that moment between us was something I never expected. A bond, a quiet, almost sacred connection built not on shared histories, but on shared wounds. She began to talk more, not about the affair, but about life, about how women like her are trained to be invisible, about the many times she had seen men walk all over women, wives, girlfriends, even her own mother, and how society taught us to bear it in silence. Her stories weren't meant to comfort me, but they did. They reminded me I wasn't alone, that what happened to me wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a larger truth about how easily women's pain is ignored, how often we're expected to pick ourselves up without being allowed to fall first. She didn't give me advice. She didn't try to rush my healing. She simply stayed, present, steady. It wasn't the grand gestures that saved me. It was her quiet existence, the way she reminded me every day that even in brokenness, there was dignity, that even when everything had been taken from me, I still had worth. I still had someone who saw me. I began to confide in her, not because I planned to, but because she was the only person who didn't look at me with pity. She didn't tell me to move on. She didn't pressure me to forgive. She just listened, and in listening, she became the anchor I didn't know I needed. Slowly, I started seeing her differently. Not as someone hired to clean, to organize, to blend into the background, but as someone who had been a silent witness to my life, someone who had known the truth even when I was clinging to the lie. Her presence began to soothe something in me. I would catch her humming softly while she worked, as if trying to breathe softness back into a home that had turned cold. And in those simple moments, I found fragments of peace, not forgiveness, not healing, but peace like cool water on a burn. She never tried to rescue me, and that's what made her so important. She allowed me the space to be destroyed, and she stayed anyway. What I learned from her was something no therapist or friend had given me: the permission to be broken without shame, and the reassurance that even in our worst moments, someone might see us and not turn away. She reminded me that resilience doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it walks into a room, sees the wreckage, and chooses to sit with you in the ruins, asking for nothing in return. The aftermath of betrayal is not a single moment. It is a series of long, slow days that stretch out like shadows. In those first few weeks, I didn't know who I was anymore. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was disoriented. Every part of my identity had been built around the life I was building with him. Every plan, every future vision, every quiet dream had him woven into it. Without that, I felt like a map without landmarks. I didn't know where to go, only that I couldn't stay in that same emotional place. And yet, for a while, I stayed, not out of weakness, but out of sheer exhaustion. Healing doesn't start with strength. It starts with survival, with waking up and making it to the next hour. The pain didn't disappear, but something began to shift. At first, it was in the smallest of ways. I started opening the curtains again, letting light into the room I had kept dark for too long. I threw away the sheets we had once shared, not in anger, but as a ritual, a small, symbolic burial of what used to be. I rearranged the furniture, changed the scent of my soap. I began slowly to remove his fingerprints from my life. These weren't just changes, they were declarations, each one whispering, "I'm still here." It wasn't a straight path. Some days I felt like I was moving forward. Other days I collapsed under the weight of grief. But even in that back and forth, I could feel the beginning of a transformation. It's a strange thing, how pain, when faced head on, begins to chisel something new out of you. At first, you only notice the absence of what was. Then, you begin to sense the forming of what could be. I began asking myself questions I had never dared to before. What did I sacrifice to keep that relationship alive? What pieces of myself did I lose trying to hold on to someone who had already let go of me? The answers weren't easy. They came with guilt and with grief. I realized how often I had silenced myself to avoid conflict. How many times I had dimmed my joy so he wouldn't feel overshadowed. How I had slowly, quietly, placed my needs last because I thought love required that kind of martyrdom. Betrayal has a way of illuminating not only what someone else did to you, but what you allowed, accepted, and endured. That recognition hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself, but it also gave me power, because once I saw it, I could choose differently. The woman who emerged in those months was not the same woman who walked into that bedroom on that cursed Sunday. She was wiser now, sharper, and not in a bitter way, but in a way that no longer mistook pain for proof of love. I stopped waiting for closure from him, stopped rereading old messages, stopped revisiting the memories that kept dragging me back into the narrative of not being enough. I began to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering differently, not with longing or anger, but with clarity, with acceptance. And somewhere along the way, I started doing things just for me. I enrolled in a class I'd been putting off for years. I reconnected with old friends I had distanced myself from. I took myself out to dinner, to bookstores, to quiet parks where I could just exist, alone. But not lonely. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. I was expanding into the fullness of who I was before love taught me to compromise myself. People began to say I looked different. Stronger, lighter, but what they didn't see were the nights I cried myself to sleep, the mornings I had to drag myself out of bed, the private wars I fought to reclaim my own worth. The glow they saw wasn't from healing, it was from surviving. It was the fire you carry after walking through something that should have destroyed you, and realizing it didn't. And all of this, every step of this painful transformation, taught me something essential. My value is not dependent on someone's ability to see it. I don't need to be chosen by anyone else to be whole. I choose myself now, every single day. I choose my peace over chaos. I choose honesty over comfort. I choose depth over performance. What happened to me broke my heart, yes. But it also broke open everything that had been suppressed beneath the surface. And in that brokenness, I found the raw material to rebuild not just a life, but an identity I no longer need to apologize for. The pain that once consumed me became the very thing that cleared the way for freedom. Not freedom from him, but freedom from the illusion that love must hurt, that being loyal means being lost. I became someone I admire. Someone who didn't just survive betrayal, but used it as the spark to finally come home to herself.